All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a great start to your week. I'm just pulling up our curriculum for this week so that I have some notes as I'm talking to you. But we're on Unit 7, Session 2. So, Unit 7, Session 2, we're in the story. Um, we're talking through the story of really the conquest of the promised land, this land that God has promised to his people, but they have to conquer it and overtake it. Last week we talked through how Joshua has this, what we would look at and say, man, Joshua, you have a lot of pressure on you following a man like Moses who served Israel faithfully for 40 years. But Joshua is reliant on the Lord and the Lord enabling him and Joshua staying faithful to the Lord's word. So we're going to look at kind of the first big chapter in this conquering. And it's when the first big city that they had to take down was Jericho. But to do that, they would have to cross the Jordan River, which is a story in and of itself. So we're in Joshua chapter 3, verses 5 through 8, or excuse me, verses 5 through 17. Pardon me there. And then also Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. And I really like this lesson mainly because of the contents of chapter 4, because I think it's really unique and it's something that we don't do often. So we'll get there. But in just talking through what takes place in chapter 3, they approach the Jordan River, and the priests are to carry this ark of God that was basically the symbol of God's presence with them. And they would have to cross this river that was not just like a little creek, but was a huge river. And during harvest season, it would overflow its banks. And so not only were they having to cross a major river, but they were having to cross it at a time in which the water was high. And so it only makes that more difficult. Had they tried to just walk through it, they would have been swept away, no doubt. And so they have this great task before them of figuring out how we're going to get on the other side of the river, but God has already figured that out for them. And so, but if we look at verses 5 through 8, you see that before God does this, he tells the people to consecrate themselves, to make themselves holy. In other words, prepare yourself because God is going to do great and powerful things. And it was actually the day before he would do this. And so, number one, God has set us apart to experience his power. Part of being a believer means that, and we've been set apart, and because of that, we get to experience the great and mighty power of our God. I mean, how many times have we maybe we haven't seen a sea split, but how many times have we seen families restored? How many times have we seen relationships built, or people with terminal diseases healed? Like God does incredible and mighty things, and he says, consecrate yourselves, make yourself holy, set yourself apart, right? Don't be like the world, right? Because the world doesn't have anything to trust in or hope in, but we do. Second point would be later on in that chapter, um, God does this act of he splits the Jordan River, much like he did the Red Sea nearly 40 years ago for the Israelites. And another thing that this just reminds me of is, excuse me, oh my goodness, pardon me. It's been a long morning. I'm yawning, but pardon me. The second thing he does is that God prepares the way for us. And in this moment, he didn't just prepare their hearts. He didn't just set these circumstances in order. No, he literally carved out a path for them to where, again, they would cross on dry ground. Um, Guys, I mean, we look at the stories in the Bible and we read that and it's like, oh yeah, I know that. But can you imagine seeing a raging river stop and part to where you can walk through on dry ground? I mean, this was incredible. And we get to chapter 4 and we see that God calls us to remember what he's done. They take these 12 big stones and they stack them. And it's really what became known as an Ebenezer, right? So we all know the song, Come Thou Fount. There's a line in there that says, here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. And that line really talks about really a physical thing that is created, right? I like to go hiking. Hannah and I do. We like to go hiking, and sometimes if we go to a waterfall or a creek or a river or something, you'll see these stacks of stones. Some people maybe just are doing that for artistic work, but I like to believe some people are doing that as they're creating this Ebenezer, right? It's us taking a moment to build this physical thing to where we remember God's faithfulness, and that's what the Israelites did here on the other side of the Jordan. Is they they took time before they would continue their conquest. They took time to remember all the great things that God has done, not only there at the Jordan River that day, but the things even prior. And so that's one of the things I challenge even you to do. Like, forget teaching for a moment. And this is something we should certainly teach, but for all people, we need to understand that we have to look back in our lives and remember God's faithfulness because he's been so good and so faithful. Sometimes when life is just really difficult, it's easy to lose sight of it, but one of the most helpful practices is stopping and remembering what God's done. You know, where are those Ebenezers in your life? You know, where are those stacks of stones where you have stopped to remember those moments? Um, because when we remember God's faithfulness in the past, it helps us to trust Him to be faithful in the present. And so I hope that helps you guys this week. Hope that's something that touches your heart. I know it does mine. And just let me know anything I can do for you. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.